So I'll call this meeting to order. My name is Tom Newell, Electoral Area Director for Area Ave. And I'll begin the meeting with our traditional lands acknowledgement. We acknowledge and respect the Indigenous peoples within whose traditional lands we are meeting today. So thank you everyone for attending. I'd like to do some introductions first. Way over there, Cheryl Graham, Director Graham, Electoral Area E. City Councilor and member of the city's representative on the RDCK board, Keith Page. Beside me here, manager of community, everything basically, is Joe Chirko, rec center, parks. Thank you, Joe, for coming up. And Yev Maloff, our chief financial officer, will be presenting today's presentation, the budget, the understanding of the budget. So we have people online. And so for those of you online, if you could remain muted, and when Yev just says ask questions if you have a question. So we're monitoring chat. So if you in your Zoom, you'll see on the bottom a big chat, and just put your name in there saying my name is or whatever, I'd like to ask a question. You can do that anytime, and we're monitoring chat, so we'll get to you eventually for sure. The introductions, the online, we could all just kind of enunciate as best we can so that everyone can hear. So I just had mentioned it here, but in the room, if you could stand up, speak to the owl, and maybe introduce yourself, and then ask your question of Yev. Ask your question. Also, we're here to present, but we're also here to hear. It's a two-way thing. We'd like to hear your comments, thoughts, ideas, so that we can process those as we move this budget and future budgets forward. So it's not really established as a debating thing, hey, I believe this and you believe that, but more a discussion type of thing so that we can hear your views. We may disagree, we may agree, but certainly we do want to hear that. So with that in mind, of course, we all know that in these times of hecticness, we really want to stress respect. We have different opinions, but we can respect. So my job as chair is basically to monitor that part of it, to make sure everything's being handled in a respectful manner. I'll do my best in that way. So what I was getting at is questions is one thing. Hey, what does this mean? But also, I'd like to share this. So it's not just your opportunity to ask us questions, which is important, but it's also an opportunity, as I said, to share your feedback with us. And so as Yev goes through it, he's going to explain the RDCK complicated multi-service way in which we have to tax and the way that we handle those funds that come to us. So he'll give you an understanding of that. And so with that, you can kind of get an understanding of how we tax in particular silos, if you will. So we'll go through that. Any questions, as I say, Yev just says, please feel free to ask a question when he's in the middle of a slide, hey, whatever, and we'll do the best we can to accommodate that. So I think that covers enough of it to get us going. So Yev, take it away, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tom. So we have 5 people up here that are available to answer questions. So we'll and listen and as well. So I might deflect or have some of the questions answered by board members or by Joe, especially when we get to the Parks and Rec section of the presentation. We have a fairly lengthy presentation this evening, and it could have been longer than it is, but in the interest of time, we've only kept it to about 50 slides. So we're going to try to keep things moving and not dwell, too much on any one slide. In some cases, if the questions are too complicated or looking for an answer we don't have available today, we'll we'll take notes of it and try to get back to you with a response at a later time. So this presentation will be available tomorrow on the web page for this event. So if you go to the Nelson ENF event page on the website, this presentation will be available tomorrow.
The reason it's separate is Yev's doing 10, 12 presentations?
9.
9
Only 9.
presentations. Only 9 this year. Used to be 12.
Yeah.
So he's doing this in various areas around the region so that people can access it more easily. And also there's different services up in the cusp and crest and what have you. So anyway, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so agenda today, we'll just talk a bit about regional districts and their services model, property assessments and their budget impact, overall outlook for 2025. We'll go through a bunch of the services that residents in this area participate in, and then as well a few pie charts what estimated taxation looks like by defined area, depending where you live. Okay, just a preamble. This is a draft budget. This isn't the final budget. It's subject to change. This is, I think, our third draft since we sent the first one out about 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we're having ongoing, our fiscal year end's not done, so those adjustments are affecting the current budget. And as well, staff, committee, commission director, and board level reviews are continuing. So the budget we're looking at today, you can expect it to probably change over the coming weeks. A bit about the budget review process. The budget process, for the most part, starts in October in the fall and continues right up till about the board meeting in March, where the budget's finally approved. So I would say there's literally dozens of meetings between board meetings, committee and commission meetings, local service committee meetings, and as well as other meetings with directors to get through this through the budget process. If anybody really wants to understand some of these budgets in detail, for instance, the recreation budgets, we have public meetings available where we go into much more thorough detail and say to the rec budget and that discussion, or for resource recovery and waste, we have sub-regional and regional meetings. So if anybody's got a really particular interest, check our events calendar. So most of those budget meetings have already taken place. They start late in the fall, and we'll have multiple meetings with the participants. So it's an ongoing and evolving process to get to where we are at today. So the budget that we're looking at today was actually just published around noon today, and it is on our website. It was put on our website. So just move forward a bit. So for those not familiar with a regional district, so the regional district of Central Kootenay is one of 27 regional districts or RDs in BC. It's comprised of 11 rural electoral areas, A through K, 10 member municipalities, one of which is Nelson. Provides 186 services, roughly grouped. This isn't the complete list, but parks and recreational facilities, fire protection, emergency management, resource recovery, waste, building inspection, planning, GIS bylaw, transit. And one key thing to note, each service stands on its own. So we can't, if one service has a surplus in a given year, we can't, the regional district by regulation can't move that surplus to a service that has a deficit. So, and as well, each service has to be fully funded. It gets its share of general admin, IT, and other overhead amounts. So that's the big difference between a regional district and a municipality. The municipality has more flexibility to move funds between services that it provides and make those sort of decisions. In the case of a regional district, that flexibility is not available. Just a few statistics, some questions that are often asked. So there's 298 full-time equivalent employees. So that means if you add up all the hours that that all the staff and employees of the regional district work in a year, and divided by roughly 1,800 hours, which is a full year of work, you come up with about 298. And there's 280 volunteer firefighters on top of those 298. 65,000 residents in the regional district and over 22,000 square kilometers. Okay, won't spend much time on this slide. So the regional district is highly regulated by provincial statutes and regulations. Here's I would say not a complete list, but some of the main ones there. Circled in red are the two very most impactful ones. That's the Local Government Act and Community Charter. So anybody's interested in learning about how the RDs are regulated, those are the two primary acts. A couple other ones of note there are Environmental Management Act, which governs our waste delivery, or waste services. Emergency and Disaster Management Act is a relatively new act as well that's impacting our emergency management services. Okay, one area that's there often causes a lot of confusion is how the property taxes calculated for a regional district. So getting back to, again, each service, we create a budget or do a budget for each service. And out of that budget, a tax requisition amount is derived. And then completely separate from that, the provincial organization, BC Assessment, does your property assessment. So we're not involved at all with property assessments. We're not involved with any disputes or anything involved with that. So that's a separate process. So each service comes up with a tax requisition amount, and then we get a tax rate per thousand for each service. That's a little bit different than municipality. Again, municipality just lumps it all together and says, here's your tax rate, $7 or $10 per thousand. At regional district, we separate them all out and we have 186 different tax rates. And then you multiply that by the assessed value for each property that gets served by that service. And then you get a property tax for each individual property for each service. And I'll show you soon what that detail looks like. While we're talking about assessment values, one interesting graph to look at is this one here. So the blue, still blue, or the bluish looking bars, they represent the 1 year change in assessment value. So year over year for each of the electoral areas and municipalities. So Nelson, E, and F are circled in the bottom. So we're looking at roughly, they're all between 3 and 5%. But if you look at the overall distribution of blue bars for the regional district, it ranges anywhere from -6 to almost 11. So about a 17% spread in 1 year difference. So that's a lot of people think, okay, that's a big difference. But if you look at the orange bars, that's a 9-year average. And in the orange bars, there's only about a 5% distribution. So over the course of time, generally for the most part in over the regional district, the changes revert to a mean in this period. Okay, this is just an example of property tax for somebody living in a rural area. So this is in the city of Nelson. So what we're talking about today, we're going to discuss today, is just the regional district portion of taxes, which is circled in red there. As well as that, what you'll get on your tax bill is some school taxes, provincial rural tax, police tax, hospital tax, and a BC assessment charge. So on your tax bill, it'll show multiple lines for the regional district. The one big line with the biggest charge is going to be for all the services that everybody in your electoral area participates in. But not everybody in an electoral area gets fire service. So if you're living in an address that gets fire protection, then that'll show as a separate line on your tax bill. So that's just a summary of a electoral tax bill. And so one of the key documents, and I'll show you a slide where you can actually read these, is our financial plan, and it is available on the regional district website. And once again, we're on our third draft this term. So the three main types of pages available there is a taxation detail by area municipality, and that shows a taxation change over 3 years for each of the services in that electoral area and municipality, as well as the assessment change. So if you're looking for an overall snapshot for an area municipality and what services and what they cost, that's a sheet to go to. Then there's a taxation summary, and that shows all of the electoral areas and municipalities and how did their assessment change and how did the tax change. So if you want to compare how different areas did comparison to each other versus municipalities, that's the page to go to. And then behind that is the larger section about well over 200 pages of detailed service statements. For every single service, there's a detailed service statement, but for every account, it shows the amounts for the actuals, draft actuals for last year's budget, and then this 5-year budget from 25 through 2029. So those are the detailed service statements. So that package again is about 300 pages, lots of information there, but it really gives you it gives a good understanding of the regional district. Okay, taxation details example. We're not going to go through this in detail. So this is Area E, and again, 23 through 25, the requisition assessments, requisition amounts, rates per thousand, and then showing how, and then all the services on the left are listed. So the top part above where these subtotals are is the services that everybody in Area E participates. In the bottom, it lists all the services that only defined portions of Area E participate in. So those aren't not included in an average because you can't include partial components in the average. So same for Area F, slightly more services there. And then the City of Nelson. So these are the roughly 8 or 9 services that the City of Nelson shares and partners with the regional district for. Okay, any questions so far? Moving along fairly quickly here. Okay.
Where's the water, Jay? Where's the water and waste? Where's the water services filed in one of the very beginning? Where's water maintenance, like Duhamel Creek? Where are they filed on there?
Yeah, so well here we are, right at the bottom here is the Duhamel Creek and Woodland Heights water systems. So it shows them here, but if you really want to see the detail of those two services, well, you get the most detail from your from the advisory committee meetings. But besides that, for this area, they're shown on the bottom. And there's no taxation here because the requisition is not based, it doesn't show taxation because the requisition is not based on assessment. Your cost for a water system is based on a parcel tax as well as user fees. But anyway, so the details for those two services will be available in the detailed service section. Any other questions? Okay. Where are we here? Okay, so this is one of the other 3 components of the financial plan. This is the summary that allows us to compare the electoral areas and the municipalities. So it shows the change in assessments, percentage change of assessments is there. And for Area E and F, it's about a 4.8 and a 3.8% increase in average increase in assessed value. And the City of Nelson a little bit higher, almost 5. And then the net change in taxation on the far right-hand side for each of the areas. So 10.1 for E, 10.4 for F, and 7.9 for the City of Nelson. A question might be, what does net non-market change mean? So what non-market change is new builds, renovations, subdivisions. So anything that's adding to your assessment base that's not being driven by market values, that's a non-market change. So we take the gross change, subtract the non-market change, and that gives the net change. And that basically that net change is what an existing property owner who didn't do any renovations would expect to see on average in their tax bill increase. And once again, this is in the financial plan workbook. Okay, so we'll jump into some slides regarding 2025. So the latest draft shows a 6.5 average increase in the budget. So we did a bit of survey a couple weeks ago. We found most or the RDs, the municipalities we surveyed, were looking somewhere between a 7 and 9% increase this year. So we're just slightly below that. There's a few outliers that are less, and there's a few outliers that are higher than that. So the tax requisition that we have in the budget this year is actually $700,000 less than we predicted last year. So that's on average. Again, some services are going to be more, some are going to be less. CPI increase on staff salaries and director stipends, 3.3%. So that's effectively using a 2-year average, which is what we've been using for the last, I think, 8 years. Decreasing interest rates are reducing some interest charges on short-term loans, which will help, but it's also reducing investment income. So we will expect to see that cut back. And the other big thing we're working on is implementing a formal asset management plan throughout the organization. So that's becoming a growing requirement for external grant stream, primarily Community Works. And the board last week approved a new asset management specialist position in the 2025 financial plan.
Can I ask a question?
Sure,
What
yes.
does that mean?
What is,
Asset management.
you want to talk to it, Joe?
Yeah,
Okay, so an asset management specialist, so when you have large physical buildings, in particular things like recreation complexes, but also fire halls or even large pieces of equipment, an asset management specialist is someone who puts together a plan. It's actually 2 parts. One is long-term capital replacement. So for example, when we get to the Nelson Community Complex, there's a large capital project in that service this year. And that's the replacement of the refrigeration. So that would be something that asset management person would put into a plan and say, these are the types of things that you should be expecting 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So it takes, on the other side of it, it's also continual renewal of pieces. So ensuring that proper maintenance and proper investments are done at the right time to extend the life of an asset. So that's what it does. So in terms of a house as a homeowner, that would be me. I changed my roof in 2008, I think. So I'm coming up technically to where that roof would be, sorry, not the roof, but like the shingles and everything would be scheduled to be changed. So it was 20-year shingles. So 2028, I should start expecting that I may need to do that work. So on a much bigger scale, that's what that person is doing.
what have they done in the past about that person?
Well, I would say everybody has attempted to do it. I would say in our water services, we've been doing that for a while in a pretty comprehensive way. Water services are a little bit easier. They're literally lengths, kind of like lengths of underground pipe. It's kind of easier to understand that piece. Our stuff in REC, or whether it be in resource recovery, that is more difficult. So where asset management
is falling down, not so much that we didn't identify when assets needed to be replaced. More that we're probably not funding it correctly for when those things become real to actually have the funding to do. So that's probably the biggest challenge of the process. Yeah.
So it was being managed internally in each sort of unit, but now somebody's gonna oversee it as a whole.
Oversee it as a whole, because there's actually, it's more than just what we were doing. So like on the, I would know, for example, we're gonna talk there eventually about, sorry, make sure I'm not going.
Yeah, no.
I could talk all day, but, the refrigeration plant. So the refrigeration plant, we know we have a tight timeline on, because it's actually partially legislated. That every 20 years, according to Technical Safety Authority, you're supposed to be replacing that equipment. Where it gets more complicated is predicting what that equipment is going to cost. That's actually a pretty specialized area that's required. So oftentimes we'll know that a roof needs to be approximately replaced around here. The trick is knowing how much that potentially is going to cost them. That's not something that we have expertise in.
I was wondering if you have potentially someone to hire on the inside that could change their job position to take on this new role in hope of cost saving.
I would suggest the answer is no. We don't have that expertise on the inside. But what we do have is one of the questions at the board last Friday was, is this a new department? No, it's not. We don't really know we don't know what this will look like over time. But what we know is that we have a procurement specialist, we have project managers, we have now this asset management specialist. So what we're gaining at the regional district is essentially a team, people that already exist, plus subject matter experts. So I am a subject matter expert in recreation, but I'm not a subject matter expert in what an asset's going to cost in 10 years or 20 years. Without that kind of detailed planning and looking ahead, we can get ourselves into problematic situations. And in fact, when we get to S226, the actual increase in that service is an asset management cost. It's that replacement cost of that physical plant. That's gonna cause one of the bigger parts of the jump of the requisition.
But we know that every aspect is going to have a cost. So what makes this person specialized in every aspect the RDCK is going to have?
So what they have is an expertise in projecting costs. So there is actually a realm of study that works on how you do this work. They also will have the time to look forward. So many of our managers right now are very much concerned with the day-to-day operation and not what that future piece holds. So that's partly what's coming in that position.
Should this all be known by a project manager?
A project manager is exactly that phrase, project manager. So their job is to deliver the project manager in this case, when it comes to the refrigeration plant, is not to predict that the refrigeration plant needs to be replaced. Their job is that when that piece is identified, is to start planning how we're going to replacement, setting up our tendering processes, and then managing the actual work that's required to change the plant. That's what they do.
Joe, do you want to touch on its relationship with setting appropriate reserve levels?
Yeah, so when I say that especially right now. What we are in particular issue is that if you said you're trying to plan right now to put some money away, partial funding of that project in the future, you're trying to find, maybe it might be a balance between putting money away and borrowing at that time. So those are the pieces. So one of the things that they're doing with us, with myself, would be planning what is the plan to have enough funds available. So in terms of rec, our only service that probably has this dialed in, like, and not, I wouldn't say dialed in completely, but is the most ahead is our Castlegar and district service. So in that service, they were the actual first ones that we did. We started an asset management project a number of years ago, and we started it at that facility because it was our oldest facility. So that group of elected officials has gone through a process where this is year 3 of that process, where they started at a $600,000 increase in requisitions. Last year was 7, each year is $100,000 more until they get to what they consider $1 million, which is either put into reserves or is dedicated to asset replacement. And so we work through that across, the service to manage that piece. So that's the kind of planning that we need in all areas of our business.
I'll just add, just reviewing from our board meeting, near as I can count, the project managers managed either beginning or completing in 2024, 45 or 50 projects. So saying, hey, let's do asset management on top of that is not possible, the formal asset management position. So that was part of the reasoning. And I'll leave it at that. So that job that they're full. And we've got a question here. Go ahead.
Okay, so when you have construction of a building and you're pre-planning ahead for maintenance on a component, say 15 years in advance, the reality is that there is no way that you could possibly anticipate 15 years from now what is going to be available for options in terms of replacement. Because building technologies are changing, requirements are changing. So I find this solution extremely complex and unproductive. If instead the regional district set aside one account that was for the maintenance and upgrading of all of their assets, which you are contributing to, and that you have a total amount that you are trying to achieve in that's transparent to everyone. And then as you have repairs and maintenance that have to come up in that time frame, you look at your best options and you draw from that account. Rather than trying to create a zillion different accounts that you're trying to put money into and you're trying to anticipate solutions to building things that you may not even have in the technology options right now, but will be available 10 years from now. So I'm finding that.
Can I just interject for 1 second? Because actually that is what we're moving toward, except we can't do it globally, as Yeb said. We must do it by each service, because each taxpayer in that service we can only request taxation for a service you receive. We cannot then take some of that money and put it for some service you don't receive. So that's exactly what we're doing, but we have to do it legally, service by service by service. So we need 182 reserve balances. We just have to do it that way because the way the provincial government has outlined our funding, we just don't have the ability to transfer. So I didn't want to interrupt, I just wanted to kind of retweak that. And going back, do you feel like your question was answered about, oh, sorry.
I think that would have been a brilliant solution.
Yeah, we can't do it.
We can't.
Cities can do it though.
Yeah, city's can have a,
Would have been a brilliant.
It would simplify.
So, digressing from that great solution that we can't go forward on, my question was, is this job posted? And
Not
when-
yet.
not yet, no, just got approved on Friday.
Okay.
For a
And-
June start, I think we were.
Yeah, so I would
suggesting
expect to
July
see
start.
a posting in probably,
Thing with requirements and salary.
yeah, that should come up in, I would say sometime in March or April. Would be my guess. So we've spent quite a bit of time on asset management. What I would encourage people to do is Google's your friend. There's a lot of information on there. Asset management is very complex. It's we're not the only municipality in Canada. What's basically driving it is a number of years ago, a lot of municipalities, I know if you go to Osoyoos, you've heard what's happened in Osoyoos. I think their taxation rates increased by 30 or 40% because they weren't doing asset management. And so they weren't the only municipality caught in that situation. So the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities, as well as the UBCM, basically a push that municipalities need to step up and local governments need to step up their approach to asset management and take a longer term look. Yes, of course, you're not going to know exactly what you're going to do in 15 years, but in 15 years, or as Joe's saying, in 20 years, that piece of equipment, it's regulated that you have to change it and take it out. And so you do your best and you use probabilities and all kinds of formulas and things, and you come up with something that is far better than nothing. And it's not all common sense. It's actually, there's engineering formulas and regimented approaches involved in it. So I jumped into it a bit. It's a really interesting field, and it takes a fair amount of education and training and learning to understand how it functions.
One final question.
Sure.
Have you looked at the cost difference between actually having a position with the RDCK or contract or versus contracting out to an asset management contractor?
We did. It was in our board report last week. So it would cost basically triple to contract it out. Contractors are charging you, close to $200 an hour or more, versus an employee who's integrated. And there's other benefits that are listed would cost probably at least half, or if not less, than what a contract position would cost. Yes.
Is there a mechanism that was discussed at the board for evaluating how efficient this new hire would be? Because I'm looking at it from the point of view as a ratepayer. And I see taxes going up approximately 10 to 12%. My income's not matching that.
Yeah.
So, and we're all confronted by effects of inflation, which is a kind of a silent tax.
Right.
So somebody's getting that purchasing. It's not us.
Yeah.
So how
So
can
it's-
we restrict the amount of money that's being put on the backs of ratepayers, taxpayers, so that we can continue to live here and have our properties viable, so that somebody wants to buy it, rather than saying, geez, I can't take it, it's way too damn expensive.
Yeah, and that's a fair question. But in regards to this specific position, so the regional district gets a lot of provincial and federal grants. One of them is a community works grant, and which is, I think, just over $1 million or more, $1 million or more a year. The grant stream basically says you need to have a formal asset management plan, and as part of that, in order to function, this position is part of that to have it work. So last year, We had another grant that did an assessment of our asset management plan, put together in a roadmap. And so doing that roadmap was one of the requirements to move forward with the plan. And now we have a roadmap that an asset management specialist is required. So again, we're not unique that we don't have this. This is almost again a requirement, and having the asset management position dedicated is also not unique. And if we fail to move forward on this, we put grant money at risk is basically where it amounts to. So it's not about increase. So I think you've got that on one end, you've got a potential limitation of grants, but then on the other side, there's a reason it's being done, and that's to improve our planning and as well as our budgeting and setting our reserves going forward. So we don't end up in the same situation as other local governments do. You think you're doing great, and then all of a sudden, look at that. Now you got a 30 or 40% increase on average, not just in one service, but on average. So I think it's benefits on all ends for this position, and as well as the asset management plan.
And the idea of self-reliance,
Okay.
as opposed to being served, is not in that calculation. I'm thinking about my grandfather,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe your father. They didn't have this regular service. You know, it was a complex time, but there was, I guess, avenues where individuals could, through their own efforts.
I'm going to,
I have my own water service.
no, what I'm gonna do is, because you're talking in general, the scope of government.
I'm talking about the cost.
The scope and cost of government. So maybe we can leave that as a comment as we reach the point once we've gone through the presentation, and then we as directors and staff can hear comments from the public that might include, hey, try to find ways to shrink your government. But if we can keep it to the slides right now, then we can get through the presentation and then come back to those particular points. You had your hand up, please.
Finish your presentation, that's cool. Oh, wait.
Okay,
great, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Go
No,
ahead,
good discussion.
Thank you.
And again, there's lots of information available about asset management planning as it relates to municipalities, local governments, and what the value it brings.
And the staff report was in the special board meeting on Friday, and I've got it right here, so it's a
Okay.
great 6-page report if you want some information in the background as to why the board approved it.
Okay, we'll move forward. So 2025, these are challenges and opportunities. These are external challenges, opportunities. One that we're very well aware of is the trade disputes, including tariffs and counter tariffs. So potential to increase procurement costs, slow economic activities, which potentially lowers building permit, waste disposal, and rec fee revenue, and potentially causing more severe economic downturns, which could have a wider effect. So we are monitoring the situation, staying in close contact with other municipalities, local governments, as well as what the province's direction on it. So depending where it all goes, things could really change over the coming year. Part of that's the fluctuating Canadian dollar. We've seen it drop quite a bit in the last month or so. It's bounced back a bit. So that could lead to increased inflation, potential new federal government. Right now that impact is uncertain depending where that goes. And then artificial intelligence is in the news a lot. There's lots of, expectations, maybe misinformation on it. But the technology is evolving quickly. We're currently seeing limited, although some successful use at the regional district. Important to be mindful of accuracy and privacy concerns. And we are working on an AI strategy, including staff training components. Okay, we'll go through our, some of our services, for areas Nelson, E and F. So the top bar, we can barely just see it on top there, is the areas that are affected by or participate in each service. So the first one we'll start with is Service S100, which is general admin. It includes corporate admin, finance, IT, human resources, CAO, and the municipal directors. So this service is seeing an 8% taxation increase. One of the main spends is $138,000 for a partial roof replacement at the office. From an HR perspective, for recruiting, housing availability and high expectation for wages and compensation are definitely putting a drag on recruitment efforts. We currently have lots in some of our recruiting efforts. We have lots of applicants, but once they look at the cost of housing in Nelson, or they share their wage and compensation requirements, it impedes the process. We're starting migration to SharePoint for records management, and continued migration to the Microsoft 365 environment, as well as continuing to build our cybersecurity resilience. New website is launching soon. There should be an announcement coming in the coming weeks. And as well, the board last week approved an organization review process that'll commence this year.
Yes, sure.
Yes.
So I have two parts. I have a question for you, yeah, and then I have a proposal for the three directors, if I can give that after the answer to the question. So last week we were given the actual list of all the expenses that are part of general administration and rural administration. So correct me if I'm wrong, general administration is the administration that everybody pays into. And then rural administration is a separate expense that only the rural areas pay into, because the municipalities have their own city councils, et cetera. Last week, your slide presentation said that general administration had gone up 27%, and this one says only 8%.
Yeah, so that's based on the continuing work on 2024, as well as some board direction we received last week. So yeah, we're down to 8% now.
Okay. So within your general administration, we have sub-accounts. The one that there's three that I would like some clarification on. And one is called transfer from other service. It's 45500. And then 59500, which is transfer to other service. Now, these two categories show up in many of the expenses, but they're not tracked to anything. We can't see where it's going or what this other service is.
So let's.
Tom, I can address that. Can I address that one? So yeah, no, that's a fair question. So we've been discussing it over the last few weeks of how to expand the statement to show some more detail on that. So I don't know if we're going to be able to have that in for this budget year, but it's in consideration for next budget year. The issue with that is then, the size of this package probably grows by, I don't know, 30 pages or so. But if that meets, adds value from a transparency perspective, then we certainly discussed it and are considering doing that.
So then the other one, which is transfer from other service general admin fee.
Yeah.
Where is that money going? Because that's 3.2 million.
So if you look at each service statement, each of the other services has an account 59510 transfer to other service. So that those funds are the again, as I talked before, each service has to be fully reflect the cost of providing that service, and so we add the overhead of general admin to all those other services. So that the four series is a revenue account to general admin, so that brings funds in, and each of those other services there's a 59510 account, and that's where the cost of general admin is shown.
Okay, so, my comment on that would be that that's not showing a trail that's really reflective of being able to follow where big amounts of money are going. So increased detail would be beneficial. My proposal to the directors. So we have these two categories, general administration and rural administration. Obviously, they're there because we have two different groups of people that are being managed by the RDCK. However, it looks like this particular structure could potentially have overlapping costs when it's actually the same people that are doing the administration, and we're not really being able to reflect how much of staff time is for rural and how much is for general, and it's not necessarily being distributed appropriately. If it's possible, could we consider creating one administration account where all your expenses are coming out of that, and under that structure, then it's distributed towards either rural or general. So you'll have one administration account, all of your staffing costs will be in there, and then from within those totals, you distribute it to either rural or general, because that might actually eliminate some of the administration costs in case they're getting doubled up, because they're charging it to rural, they're charging it to general. We have no way to know what's what. Okay?
That makes sense.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if there's a comment or a note or.
Yeah, I think it's not staff. We don't have staff that are, oh, I'm putting a few hours into general and a few hours in rural. That's not how it works. The staff are the rural admin staff are basically, and I'll talk a bit about it here, are the regional fire services, bylaw enforcement, and the rural directors. So all of the finance, IT, HR, corporate admin staff all live in S100. And then a portion of those are actually charged to the rural admin. So again, I think, so rural admin, there is a general admin fee. So based on an allocation method that the board approved, I think in 2017, we take general admin costs and distribute it again to all of the other services. And one of those services that it's distributed to is S101. So again, because of the taxation, we're effectively doing what you're suggesting. We have to show the two services separate because they have two different tax bases. So we can't combine a service and then at the bottom of the service say, oh, we're going to put some tax here and some tax there. We're effectively doing what you're suggesting by doing it the way we're doing it.
Thank you.
But it's
Question, thank you.
transparent. I think that was the issue, was the transparency. Like, can we trace for that
Yeah.
3.2 million?
Well, it very much so. So if you look at this, at the package, on S100, there's the, I'm just going to look again. Transfer from other general admin fee, $3.266 million. If you go look through all of the other services at the bottom, near the bottom of the statement, there's an account. Look at the next page. 59510, general admin fee. If you add up all of the general admin fees on all those 186 services, it'll equal that 3.2 million. So it's that one is probably the most transparent of them all. And IT is very much the same. There's an IT fee in revenue fee in general admin. If you go add up all the IT fees and all the other services, it'll total that. So I don't think we can get any more transparent on the other one. I think, but further to the suggestion that we break out this the one that's a little more generic, the transfer from other services, that is something we're definitely looking at.
Thank you. Okay, excellent.
Okay, rural admin. So 25%, try to get rid of this there, okay. 25% taxation increase in 2025. And the city of Nelson doesn't pay into this, just ENF. So this includes the rural directors, but the two main components of this service is regional fire services overhead. So this is the oversight and coordination of the 21 RDCK fire protection 911 services, including structural protection units and BC wildfire service deployments and firefighter training. Most but not all the overhead costs are allocated to the 21 fire protection services. We're expecting a grant similar to we received last year for almost $500,000 of training. We expect confirmation in the coming month, and reserves they're in the budget or 75,000 are in the budget to procure a command vehicle out of reserves. And the other main component of rural admin is bylaw enforcement. So includes noise, animal control, unsightly nuisance property zoning, soil removal, bylaw enforcement. And the bylaws vary by electoral area. So not all electoral areas have the same bylaws relating to those items. So no, I was going to say, yeah. So no, I think municipality directly participates in these two parts of the service.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
I'm just don't know this, but the bylaw, do you have a different bylaw person for each electoral area? No.
No.
It's just one?
We have a few different bylaw officers.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just, like, in my area, I know that I tried to contact bylaw and not once have they come out.
Okay. Did you go online and do the online?
Yes.
Okay.
And multiple calls, and we have a really bad problem with nuisance dogs, nuisance dogs and aggressive dogs. And I called like 4 times, got a hold of him, and he not once showed up. I sent pictures, I sent video. So that to me, I get a little angry.
Okay.
I'm paying for the service and it's not being done.
Yeah.
And $40,000.
Yes. So that just a comment.
Okay. And the area you live in has an animal control bylaw?
Yes.
It does. Okay.
One of the few bylaws.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I can't speak to exact circumstances, or I'm not familiar with that. I know they are busy, and they're one animal control. I know there's lots of discussion around that, or has been at the board table, and so I don't know if you're one of the directors. Tom, do you have anything to speak to that, or not really?
Or who we can direct our comments and frustrations to in regards
Can
to.
talk to the director for sure.
Yeah, talk to your
Talk to our
director.
director, and then we can kind of work our way through to Jordan who runs the bylaw. Sure.
That's wonderful.
Or we can ask to just be removed out of that service, but you're not getting it and we're paying for it. Ask the directors. Oh. Yeah.
Okay.
But did you say 25, why the huge leap in rural administration?
Yeah, it's a range of things. Just have to get to my details here. So part of it is a wage increase, a decrease in some grants, increase in benefits. Just it's fairly well spread out. The other big increase, and I haven't talked about it here, is the increase in the IT fee. So we restructured the way we calculate the IT fee. Before it was based on workstations, and that was in our new hybrid environment where people are working from home, and where we don't have assigned workstations. We changed to a license model based on what level of Microsoft licensing they have, and as well as where employees actually work and where they put in their hours. And so the IT fee for this service increased probably more than any other service. So it's a bit of a catch up, but that also drove some of the increase in S101.
Was that the 50 to 150,000?
No, that was the 73 to 124.
Is it possible, because I believe like the cloud storage and your IT, the programs that you're choosing are quite high end for quite large organizations. Is it possible that you could share this program with one of the other regional districts to half the cost? Since it's the type of program that you've chosen has the capacity to manage that many people.
Which program are you referring to?
Both your Microsoft stuff and your what you're looking at, because your data storage is, I thought you said 300,000 to 400,000 a year for that.
No, so Microsoft 365 is it's based on a per user licensing model. So there's no really sharing ability. We do get the best provincial pricing on it. So the price, what we're paying for it is less than a commercial business is going to pay for it. So we get government preferred pricing on it, but it's based per user. So there's no opportunity to share costs there.
And how much was the data storage then? Sorry, I missed that.
Well, data storage, I think I did mention at last week's meeting. So data storage is you have your primary storage, which is what you're using, accessing files, and we have backups, and then we have, just for the sake of redundancy and security against cyber security attacks, we have a third level of storage and archive storage. So in our budget last year, I think we had a budget to replace a piece of hardware for $40,000. We did some analysis and were able to find on the cloud storage for, I believe, about $3,000 a year. So we went, in that case, there's a case where going to the cloud saved us a good chunk of money. So we do explore those opportunities. I'll make one more comment about IT. We really end up being a price taker. For a lot of our hardware, we have service agreements where we've seen, and everybody else has seen, that IT companies have been increasing their service agreements and rates by more than inflation, 10-15% per year. We're always evaluating what our other options are, and sometimes it's cost prohibitive. When they do this pricing, they know how much they could price it. They price it just enough so it's not worth for you to look at other options. But given that, we are always exploring options and looking at opportunities that maybe not to lock ourselves into some of these agreements.
So the total data collection is 40,000?
Sorry, what's that?
So the total data collection cost?
No, that was going to be the cost of one piece of hardware.
Oh, so
yeah. Well, it's hard to say now because we're hybrid. We've got cloud storage. We've got so our total cost of IT is just over $2 million per year, including staff, hardware, equipment replacement, licenses. The largest chunk of that is all our service agreements with all our software and our hardware providers.
So you spoke of remote work and stuff like that. So how much of your staff is remote now versus in office? And if you are remote, what are you guys doing with your office space more?
Yeah, we're hybrid, so we're not remote. So the other advantage of going hybrid is we actually have more staff than we have spaces in the office. So in our hybrid environment, we rotate people through the office. So we're able to maintain our current office space without having to look at procuring more office space. And the other benefit of a hybrid environment, we're able to attract, I would say, a better quality of employee or a more experienced staff. They look at the regional district. It was a hybrid opportunity. I want to go work for them versus somebody who doesn't offer that. They rate that lower. So I think we get a higher level of employee for the same cost that somebody else might be paying, just because we offer that option.
What's the difference between hybrid and remote?
Well, hybrid means you go back and forth. So remote means you're always at home, and hybrid means you come in the office part of the time.
How many remote employees do you have? Do you know?
One in New Brunswick,
Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
There's no others in Alberta or in BC? That's the
Not,
only
I
one
think
person?
we had one for a while that had to move away for a bit, but we have, I think, one dedicated hybrid employee who actually was working for us here and moved away, and we kept them on because their work could be done 100% remotely.
All right.
Okay. All right, GIS, Geospatial Information System. So this provides regional mapping services for internal, external users, including our publicly available web map. They do landfill measurements, mapping for fire services, and emergency services, including mapping of excavation alerts and orders. So on the right-hand side there on the picture is from the Argenta fire last year. So GIS was heavily involved in the communication part and working with our emergency management department in managing those events. So 3% taxation increase. There's a 40,000 GIS strategic assessment underway. Some 40,000 required for upgrades to our Esri GIS system. And then some equipment upgrades also required. And part of the work this year, GIS will be funded by a $75,000 towards our NG 911 project, which is next generation 911, basically moving from the old school analog to new school digital system that's being required. Okay. Building inspection, 26% taxation increase. So permit revenue softened considerably in 2024. We had a budget of 950, we hit 636. And because of that, we have removed 2 building inspection positions from the budget. And we'll continue to do so until permit activity recovers. So lots of work in this department, staying current with the revisions to the code. And we also have some accounting standards that may impact our permit fee revenue recognition. We don't have that fully in place yet, but that may affect the department in the coming periods. Yes.
So the last draft of reserve is showing almost $97,000 in the building department reserve. I'm curious what expenses are in the building department, as your vehicles will be under vehicles, your laptops will be under IT. What costs are in building department, and can that reserve be utilized?
That reserve is a stabilization reserve, and I think I don't know if it's in policy or it's a guideline that because building fee revenue is like this. So in years where building inspection shows a surplus, I think we put half of that surplus into the into what's called a stabilization reserve. So when it drops off, then we use some of that reserve to stabilize that. And so this accounting standard that I'm talking about is actually made require us or regulate us or push us to do that officially in that direction. So we're still working out exactly how that's going to work. So again, that it's a stabilization reserve versus a reserve for equipment. Okay, planning and use and land use. So planning department is responsible for administration of zoning, land use, development applications, development of long-term community plans, and administers the bylaw standards and policies. So 18% taxation increase. We are receiving provincial funding to address housing regulation and working on subdivision servicing bylaw, revising floodplain bylaw, and working on a regional local community needs project.
Is the RDCK considering giving away that property by the aquatic center for long-term housing?
It's not our property. So most of those lots, those are actually City of Nelson property. So what we are looking at is working with them.
You said most, not all?
Yeah, I don't have there's 5 lots. I'm just, the drawing kind of show, when you see that drawing that we had, and it shows that recreation space, that's pretty much what's our property. Everything else is City of Nelson property. So what we're looking at doing is, can that be combined and providing some extra recreation space, but supplementing what could be the affordable housing project. But the lots, the actual vacant lots, are owned by the City of Nelson.
Okay, Joe.
Oh, sorry, Mark. So, regional parks. So right now, the proposed taxation increase is 2.4% here. So in this service, the Nelson area E, area F, and there's actually Salmo and area G also in this service. This is the largest regional park service that we have in the district. What we're just showing here is just some of the main projects that are taking place this year. At Cottonwood Lake, we're doing a completion of an accessible trail loop. So one of the big pieces there at Cottonwood, if you've been up there recently, there's been a tremendous amount of change over the last 3 years, particularly after we and Nature Conservancy bought property there, which expanded the park. We've done an accessible, made that park kind of our accessible park. So that's our park where we're trying to make sure that anyone that visits that park can use a wheelchair and get around, as an example. The Great Northern Trail. So this year we have to do a management plan for the trail. So we took the trail in 2004. So we have a license with the Ministry of Transportation to actually operate that as a trail. But in order to operate it, we actually have to submit to the ministry a management plan. So that's work that we're doing. A big piece here is just brushing endangered tree work and continue our wayfinding signage. I would say that this is actually an incredible asset to the area because of our partnership with Ministry of Transportation. The ministry has put in about $2 million of work into that trail over the years. Sunshine Bay, maintenance shed, continued replace. It's more asset management pieces that we're doing there, nothing in particular, but Tagum Beach is one of the ones where we actually have a major project that we're working. We won't initiate this year, but we're going to continue the design work. If anyone has been to Tagum in the summertime, they'll know that the parking is quite challenging there. A number of years ago now, we actually bought a piece of property, and we're looking at how we can integrate that new piece of property, improve parking, but in particular, expand the active area of the park down below. So make that space bigger for where people can actually use it. Morning Mountain, to see a lot of things about maintenance sheds, and danger tree work. One of the big changes here was actually took place in 2024. We moved one of our part-time employees to full-time. So that was partially funded, partially an increase in 2024. The remainder of that increase is this year.
Question.
2025. Yes.
Just a question about some of the work that takes place at the park. Like, do you ever, like, I remember back in the day when community would get together and actually do a lot of the work. Is that something that you ever consider? You know, wow, there's a bunch of road work or machine work that needs to take place at the park. Is there any community members that would like to come and participate in that rather than having a big massive bill at the end of that? Is that anything that you consider?
Yeah, we do work with community groups, not in this service here, but for example, if you're, we bought Cristova Park, 4 years ago now, and that was completely community fundraised. We're working at a replacement of the old schoolhouse, and that piece of that park development is completely being done by community fundraising.
Not
So-
necessarily fundraising, but hey, I know a guy with a machine. Hey, I know someone,
So,
kind of like was done at Tagum Hall. A lot of that community came in and they just did the work.
yeah, I think one thing with regional parks, so yes, are we looking at stewardship type arrangements? Yes. They're not as straightforward when it comes to working with liability. This comes up a lot these days, and so that always makes things a little bit more tough. But we do work with community groups, and we do have some stewardship arrangements. So for example, Corning Mountain, we have a partnership with the Nelson Cycling Club. So we have those kinds of things in place. They don't work for all situations. Next slide. So one of the big announcements actually only came out this year, but it was actually worked on last year. But essentially is Rosebud Lake. So we essentially the BC Park Foundation funded the purchase of school operating management park under DREs. We grew from 16 to 80 hectares, so we grew by 64. We added 64 hectares of park there, which was all funded by the BC Parks Foundation. That's always been part of that park plan. So Rosebud Lake is primarily a refuge area. And what we mean by that is we primarily are holding it for conservation, but there will be more trails added and some interpretation. But it's not the same type of park as, say, a Hagen Beach or a Cottonwood Lake. One thing that we are finishing up is a regional parks, trails, and water access strategy. So we've been working on that all the way through 2024, and we'll complete that in 2025. In particular, what that is intended to do is to try and provide a framework for why the district would acquire new land and why it might not. I think the district in the last 8 years, already 2 terms, it's probably expanded regional parks more than at any other time. And so that work, so what we're trying to do is just put some definitions around that. And in some cases, actually identify parks that are truly regional. And what we mean by truly regional is more regional than others, where it might be that the whole regional district should be contributing to the operation of a park under certain conditions. So this is going to be a foundational document for the district and should be finished in fall of 2025.
Just another question about that.
Mhm.
How do you decide if you're going to take over another park? Does that come to
the locals that are gonna have to pay for it for the next 100 years to maintain it? Or how is that decision made?
So over time, it's come to the district in different ways. So for example, Crestova, well, actually, almost every regional park starts at some level as a request from the public. In the case of Crestova, it started as a request, and then that group fundraised the majority of that funding. In the case of Rosebud, we had that as well, but we went and looked for 100% external funding to purchase the park. And that was the BC Parks Foundation. Just to be clear, BC Parks Foundation is not BC Parks. It's a separate foundation, completely separate of BC Parks. In the case of Tagum Beach, which was, geez, a decade ago. It's got to be a decade ago now. That was an opportunity to buy property that was directly adjacent. That was a public discussion, but mostly a political discussion about what the needs of that park are. So we took that opportunity at that time. So they come up in different ways. Cottonwood Lake, for example, we worked with Nature Conservancy to buy half of that park, and the Friends of Cottonwood Lake to buy the park that's regional district, part of the park that's regional district. So it comes to us in many ways. But what that strategy is about exactly that.
Right.
For example, what are the types of parks that we should be looking at? What is the difference between an active park? When we say active park, that would be something like Tagum Beach versus Rosebud, which is a concert. Well, that's not Rosebud, that's Cottonwood. But the previous picture of Rosebud, which is primarily for conservation. So those two types of parks come with very different costs.
Yeah, and what does it cost? Like, what are your fees to maintain all the parks that the regional district has?
So all those regional districts, I can only think in this case right now, this service this year is, I'm going to say
1.68 million is this service.
So that's the entire budget. It's not.
That's the expense.
Yeah, that's the expense. And then the requisition is.
Requisition is 1.58.
Yeah. And so the entire budget for these parks is 1.6, but 1.158.
1.158.
Yeah, comes from requisition.
So it's not just purchasing a park, it's maintaining it.
It's
right?
maintaining it, it's developing it, it's doing all of those kinds of pieces. And the parks change a lot over time. Tagum Beach, it used to be pretty basic park. But its usage now means that we have to manage it more robustly than we did before. Rec. So recreation, this is Nelson defined, I should actually say defined area E and area F. So this service is, when I say defined area E, that means that not all taxpayers from area E pay into this service. So the easier way of describing it is who doesn't participate, and it's just easier to describe it that way. It is really Balfour, Herrick, Proctor. That area does not pay into this service. And just to be clear, because it comes up, that area was never included, was never asked if they wanted to participate. So that other area, the defined portion of E, F, and the city of Nelson, they were asked to referendum. So the big piece in 2024 is that we replaced the boilers. But this service sees a particular big requisition increase or taxation increase of 11.7%. It's in particular because of a couple of pieces. First are the capital projects. We're doing $1.2 million worth of either capital planning this year and procurement and work, and that work will continue into 2026. So this year for the refrigeration project, we're doing all of our engineering and hopefully all the purchasing of the machinery. Just note this is a project that we're gonna have to watch. We're gonna be watching it carefully. We don't know what's gonna happen on Tuesday, I believe is March 4th. So those kinds of things could change how we attack this project. And that's the tariffs.
Question for this refrigeration, that includes both rinks?
That price right now is both rinks, yes.
Okay, how about the curling rink?
No, the curling rink is not a service of the regional district. That's owned by the city of Nelson. That's city of Nelson responsible.
I have a question. I'm kind of new at this, so maybe everybody else knows the answer, but why weren't those other regional districts invited?
So there was actually no one around this political table to answer that question. But what the simplest thing that I can give as an answer is that when regional districts, goes back a long ways, but when regional districts were created, the original, so back in 1967, there were 2 recreation services set up. One used to be called Rec 5, which is the current participants. The other is Rec 10. So those 2 services have existed since the beginning. And so when it was the pool in 1972, I believe, that was the referendum area. So it's the same area. And when it came to 2003, when they did that referendum, they kept that same area. So I wasn't actually in this role. I was actually working in Preston at that point in time. I don't know what those discussions were at that time, setting up the service area. But the easiest explanation is that it's the service area already existed.
There's a natural geography.
Pardon? And there is a natural driving geography, yes.
Okay, so, our residents of Area E in Blewett have been asking for a referendum on this topic. The last referendum was 2003, I believe, which means that's 22 years ago, where the current residents may have a different value system. Either maybe Balfour Harris wants to participate in it, and maybe we all don't, but we won't know that until we can bring forward this as a referendum. However, Mike Morrison, who is supposed to provide us the process for being able to initiate this, is so far refusing to give that information. So I'm just gonna say that publicly, that we're not getting cooperation from RDCK staff to help us go through this process to determine if Area E wants to be in this service or not. What I would really like is if Keith, if you could sort of explain to us all how this works, because from what I understand, the NGCC belongs to RDCK. The other civic arena belongs to Nelson. However, there's some agreement where the regional district is actually going to cover all the expenses. So in the case of this cost, this is being downloaded, from what I understand, so please correct me, this is being downloaded to RDCK, not the city of Nelson. And we also have, I believe in a meeting, Janice Morrison said that the city of Nelson has already allocated all their community works grants, and so they won't be contributing to these costs. So is that accurate? And would you mind explaining to all of us how this relationship works with these properties?
Sorry. So actually, I think Corinne, I could probably answer that the best.
Okay.
So in the establishment bylaw for the service, I don't have it with me here today, but there's actually, it clearly indicates what this service pays for. So what the service pays for, just in terms of Civic Center, it pays for the refrigeration plant. The plant is actually located in the NDCC, and the refrigerant is delivered under the roadway and into the Civic Center. The regional district provides the operational funding for the arena as an arena from the time that we start putting ice in, which will be late September. The arena opens up usually typically on October after the Thanksgiving long weekend and typically closes in the next 2 weeks coming up here. So we're responsible for those operational costs. The city of Nelson is responsible for all the, right now, all the structural upgrades to the civic center, all the roof, all of those kinds of pieces inside that building that are capital in nature. City of Nelson is responsible for. The real capital piece that we have is the refrigeration. So it is defined very clearly in the bylaw. Very specifically, to ensure that that type of situation didn't happen. Bernie, so the question was about, do we do the curling? So in particular, we don't, because the curling rink is not a defined thing that we do and fund from that service. Operationally, capital wise, or in any way. So
That particular thing is a city of Nelson responsibility.
Just to illustrate the point a little further, when we did the service review with Area E and Area F and talked about that rural consent piece, we put a lot of pieces in place in the service establishment bylaw that really speaks to exactly the situation and process we would go through to even consider bringing something like another facility into or adding a service like taking on the ice plant making. It's very specific. I think the trigger limit for cost was anything over $250,000. Requires feasibility studies, requires an understanding you can do it. And I think
that's
so we put protections in place to keep the service in scope.
And just a quick question about user fees. So a lot of people use the what we have.
Yep.
Have you ever considered giving the people who foot the bill, the tax bill, a discount?
So give me a sec. I'm going to slide next to this. That's going to talk about how many people used the facility last year, and I can explain it there. Right here on this slide, this is some of the R&M work that's in particularly. Oh, sorry, we can go to the next. Sorry.
Okay.
The slide looks so similar. So, in particular, this year we have about $40,000 in elevator repairs, Zamboni batteries. It's an electric Zamboni. We have to replace them this year. And we're doing a capital renewal of fitness equipment. But what's in particularly important is how that 11.7 breaks out. So 6.1 of that 11.7 this year is increases in capital costs. 4.6% of that increase this year is actually the increase in interest on the long-term debt. So when the building was built, we borrowed the debt. Last payment of debt will be in the spring of 2030. But I think we took out in this case 3 separate loans, and those loans have come up for renewal. When they were last renewed, they were down in the 2% range. Almost all of them are over 4%. So essentially, our interest payment on that loan is back almost to what it was when we first borrowed. So it's gone up and down through the years, but it's an in particular cost this year. And there's a 1% increase in the requisition that's applied to the operational budget.
I have a question. Why doesn't the district sell this all back to the city, pay off the loan, and then they can adopt it? What benefit is there to the district owning any part?
The district, because the residents of the district that are in the participating service area participate in the service.
But we don't get a discount or anything.
Well, actually, I'll get there.
Oh, yeah.
You do.
Okay.
So we'll go to the next page. So these are particular programs for our residents who may not be able to afford the admission fees that we do have. So there's 2 particular projects that the board I said, move forward on. One is called low cost recreation. And so one of those things is called cheer events. And those are when we allow admission for $2. The other thing that we're doing, which we just had actually, Family Day, was sponsored by the co-op. So not Kootenai Co-op, co-op. So the co-op, like the gas station down in Fairview, and in particular, it was all coordinated, so we know, from the co-op in the valley. And so they paid for free admission in Castlegar and Nelson on Family Day. And in Nelson, we had 656 people attend the facility between 1 and 4 o'clock. So those are the two in particular programs. The biggest program is Leisure Access, and this program has changed quite a bit. Currently, in the whole regional district, we have 1,130 people that are part of this program, and the threshold there is that we're essentially looking at people that meet the low income standards as according to StatsCan. But also if there is a situation where we have adjudicators in the community that can suggest that a family or a person requires financial assistance. And what this does is this is a 50% subsidy to adults to $150. It is a 75% subsidy to youth, and that's up to $300. So that's how that program works in the district. And it was just implemented really this January, and the board is going to review that in a year. In particular, because we want to make sure that it actually, our previous program was run a little bit differently, in particular to ensure that this hasn't negatively impacted residents that can't necessarily afford to use the facility. The next page is where I'll talk to you about user fees.
Which count is the Nelson Rec Center in?
226.
226.
And you'll actually notice Corinne, there's a new account that tracks the costs of the leisure access program.
And that was for local people, not those.
Regional District of Central Kootenai residents.
Right.
So, but just to be clear, not just residents of the participating area. It can be any resident of the Regional District of Central Kootenai.
Do you wanna just discuss how much income you're bringing in versus what the expenses are? So that people know. how much they're
Just
bringing in?
right under. So the first question was, the way our fees and charges are set up for admission, it's a little bit different for programs. And it's a little bit different for rentals. For admission, the fee, so that admission fee is set at 50% of the cost of us providing the service. So every resident gets that. Then there's different, so when you get down to youth, so adults pay 50, youth pay 25%, and youth under 5 years of age and younger are free, and adults 75 years of age and older. So what we say when we look at that with the board, the youngest youth are 100% subsidized. Youth from I think it's from 5 to 19 are 50 or 75% subsidized, and people 19 and older are 50% subsidized. So that's how that is calculated, and this is actually a year where we'll be reevaluating those fees. So what that means is technically we implemented that program in 2019 with information from 2017. The idea of the program, of the policy, was to review that every 3 years. Our problem was COVID. We didn't have full operational, so we actually didn't have any idea through those years. Last year was our closest to full operation in the district, but unfortunately Nelson we only hit what we call our operational hours in the spring of 2024. So we weren't at full operational hours at the beginning of 2004. In Preston and Castlegar, we are actually still well below what our operational hours were pre-COVID. But one of the reasons why is that Nelson has tremendous usage. So this
Well,
year,
Can we give some numbers to the public? So user fees and rental income for 2025 are forecasted to be just under $2 million. But the taxation will be just under 4 million. And then the expenses are 7.8 million. So on a $7.8 million service, they're only bringing in 2 million for income, and then the rest we're gonna have to tax and some small grants.
yeah, absolutely. And that's what the choices of those subsidization rates.
I do have a question. You said that in area E, there is like defined areas divided of how they pay for on operational cost for operations, from my understanding. Because it was a referendum done and the president really agreed to pay for that. And I mentioned 22 something. Meanwhile, I know that because I'm a transplant from Vancouver. The landscape changed tremendously during the COVID, because of the COVID. And Tara Proctor area is like with much more people who came from the city. I know 2 people, 2 families with 4 kids each, who are using the facilities for recreation every week almost.
Mm-hmm.
I know 2 streets in Blewett filled up with people my age that don't use it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So why we do the differentiation?
Why don't we charge them?
Why don't we do it
Them more.
uniformly to everybody if it is that we do need to do a cost, if it is that we need to do a cost, and everybody is using, wouldn't be fair for everyone to pay.
Not necessarily. So, fairness is always a matter of a point of view. But what we know is that distance plays a role in usage. So we do know that the further that you are away, the less likely you are to use the facility. And you'll actually see a little bit of that as we bring out the results of the survey. You'll see how that, a little bit of that indication in that study. So what directors are always doing politically when they're trying to set up these services is determine, it's a tough thing to try and put a timing figure to, but trying to say, at what point do you tax someone and at what point is that distance away from the facility so great that you're getting less and less of that proportion of population that's going to use it. So it's tough. Every service has it. We just finished, we'll be finishing coming up consultation that we did in Castlegar, and it's the same piece. In Castlegar, that facility is actually divided in 2. The aquatic center has different taxpayers than the rest of the building. So regional parks and the rest of that building are paid by all of the residents of Area I, all of the residents of Area J in the city of Castle. The aquatic center is only paid for by a portion of the residents in Area. So there's always political decisions that come into the establishment of the service.
So then it's not very valuable, the tool that we have as a referendum, the residents about it. Because also, like, I agree with you with the distance, but also I agree with the fact that for me, half an hour from Harrop to Nelson Operations Center is nothing compared to Vancouver or Kelowna.
And a lot of people who came from Carolina, Vancouver and moved here, and I know, and they moved in that area, for them, 30
Yeah.
minutes is nothing.
Yeah, no, understand, we have that conversation.
And that's why I say referendum would be a good thing to be done.
Yeah.
Because it's also not fair at a certain point to increase the cost like this and keep this one like that. Is a polarization of it.
Yeah, the challenge with a referendum in this service is this service has a large amount of assets and it has a large amount of debt. And
it always has.
And it always has.
Physical assets.
There's probably high risk that the Minister of Municipal Affairs wouldn't allow a referendum. And sorry, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs wouldn't allow a referendum. And even if they did, it would have to be everybody in that service, if it's possible, would have to participate in that referendum. So that the residents of the city of Nelson would have a say whether E could stay in that service or not. So every service getting out of it has a different way of getting out of the service. So if you're the only participant, if this, say you had a service that's just Area E, it's easier to get out of the service if it's just Area E. But once you're participating in a service that has a large amount of assets and a large amount of debt, and you went and built a new facility 20 years ago, you might go, that's a long time ago. But when everybody voted yes to that, they all said, we're all in this together. We're all expecting each other to pay our fair share to basically finance this facility for a long, long time. 20 years sounds like a long time. It isn't.
We were told it'll be like $100 a year, and last year I paid over 1,000.
But in this case, I think she's actually asking the opposite.
She is.
Yeah.
She's asking about the area residents who do not pay.
Yeah.
No, I heard her, I thought she asked, how does Area E get out of the service?
Sorry, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, that was correct. Okay, so two separate questions.
Yeah.
So getting into the service, that's a little, that might be more challenging as well.
But you think the service
That's
is not.
Cheryl can.
Oh,
She can initiate that.
Good question, because I had a long discussion with Stuart about this very topic today. Because what we have right now is a situation where we have a group of people, and I live in Balfour.
Okay.
And so I live in Balfour, the Harrop, Proctor, Queens Bay, Long Beach. We already have access to this service and we're not paying for it through taxation. We're paying through it for user fees if we go there. And if we ask our residents to now, will you pay into something that you're already getting? It's almost silly. They're almost for sure going to say no, because why would they say yes? So what Stuart has said is, if you were going to take a referendum like this to a group like Area E, and I can tell you I live there and I am almost 100% certain that it would fail.
Yes.
Because I know my neighbors. But what I will say is what Stuart said is, if there is a new facility coming on board, that would be the time. I'm also in agreement with the higher user fees for those who do not pay into the service. I'm very much in favor of that. I'm actually going to be bringing that forward more so. And if it was enough, like a substantial increase, not just a little bit, then those residents would say, why do I have to pay so much? Maybe I should pay through taxation. That might make sense. But for us to just go to our residents right now and say, hey, why don't you pay $500 more in taxation for something you already have? Who here is going to put their hand up and say yes?
Well, I agree with you, actually, that it's a good, and I didn't necessarily buy a referendum, a tool, like, to make it fair for everybody.
I inherited this. I've been doing this for 2 years.
Yeah, so, yeah, that is another option, but yeah, to be fair. And yes, I know, life is not fair, but.
I think, yeah, and just FYI, so I've been on, we'll wrap this part of it up.
Yeah, we've got, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no,
We've got 12
this is a
minutes.
conversation we've been talking
Yeah,
about for the 10 years I've been on. The
Okay.
user fees, Trail tried it, very, very difficult, very complex, and referendums are very complex.
Yeah.
And we do think about it a lot, and Director Graham brought it up recently, the fees, so it's on our agenda to look at, and yes, so go ahead, yeah.
Okay, water
Oh,
utility.
no, are you done?
Well, there's just one more,
Oh, did
there
you
was
wanna-
one more slide.
Yeah, go
It just,
ahead.
there's,
No,
we're
sorry.
doing a consultation right now, that piece, some of those results will come out in March.
Okay, thank you.
We'll
Thank
move
you.
past that.
All right, so I'm gonna fly through these, water utilities, various increases in parcel tax, user fees and some planned projects. 911 communications, so the regional district, doesn't provide the services, but contracts out the services for 911 dispatch and fire dispatch, and are also responsible for some equipment, including, repeaters, which we'll be doing some work on, as well as the migration to next gen 911. Fire protection, several region-wide initiatives, including replacement of PPE, continuing capital reserve contributions, and some CBD grants. We have 4 different fire services between ENF, Beasley Blewett with a 4% increase, Balfour Harrop with a 7% increase, North Shore a bit larger with a 20% increase in taxation. A little bit more work there going on. I think that's partially driven by increased borrowing or debt servicing costs. And then as well, Nelson contract. So a defined portion of Area E it gets their fire service from the city of Nelson. So there was a contract, or the agreement was, I think, put in place in 2017, went 5 years, and its rate increases did not keep up with inflation. So the agreement expired, and the rate we were paying before did not meet inflation. So the new formula is based on taxation equity with the city of Nelson property owners, which is become a common model between RDs and municipal services. Transit, costs of transit are going up fairly significantly. Reserves were used up over the last couple of years to fund operations. So we're seeing some larger increases, 16% in North Shore Slocan Valley, which is ENF, and then Kootenay Lake West, a 35% taxation increase. So some of this is also being driven by, again, increased costs of operations. We moved to from a less reliable, the BC Transit is actually responsible for contracting out the buses. They moved from a less reliable provider to a more reliable provider of services, and that came at a bit of a cost, as well as just the cost of buses are part of that.
I was checking all the areas and the municipalities, and it looks like ENF are the only 2 that are paying into 2 different transit accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So the CON transit area is ENF, and Coot West area DK, defined area excluding Preston, which isn't area ENF, and yet there's requisition there. Can you tell me why we're paying into 2 transit accounts?
Well, there's a long history, I guess, with transit services. There were separate transit services, and they serve different parts of the area. So from here to, say, the junction, you've got ENF on both sides, and then going up Kootenay Lake, you have ENF. So those are 2 separate services. So ENF borders 2 different transit services. So having said all of that, so one of the big initiatives that the transit service is looking at this year is sort of combining it all into one and reapportioning it on a new formula. So there was a study, an externally granted grant study done last year that's come up with some recommendations on how to combine the services and maybe potentially put in a more fair and easier to understand transit apportionment formula. So we hope to get there, if not by the end of this year, next year. So we're likely going from 3 transit services to 1. So that is coming.
And you did say that we paid for a bunch of new buses?
Well, they, not directly, so through BC, through BC Transit. So the contracts, depending on the service level requirements, BC Transit, well, actually the city of Nelson as a contractor, provides those services, but all of those discussions, are with BC Transit and the contractor. The discussions we have with BC Transit are the, level of services required, number of routes, fares, and all of that, but it's not simply we go tell them what to do. BC Transit has departments that actually do all of this analysis, and provide different recommendations and options. So there is a transit committee that meets regularly where and it's a public meeting where all of this is discussed.
But just to say that the BC Transit side of it, they determine capital spend on the buses. It's they're driving the bus in terms of deciding what buses go where the unit vehicles. City of Nelson has the operational agreement. We're the new contractor that's taken over that, that's why the reliability is.
So then really our only, besides the contract, our only other expense is the bus stations, right? The bus stops?
Yeah.
Okay, so we have 221,000 in reserves, just in Transit Coot West. Other locations, looks like there's probably another 35,000. So are we, using any of these reserves?
Sorry, Corinne, can I just throw in here, there's 3 services, that's 238, 230, so area E, there's 3 services, S237, S238, and S239. And
Yeah.
B and F is paying into 237, 238 and 239.
So there's 250,000.
So that's not a current, list of reserves. So we're still working on finishing up the last year's, closing reserve
Do you have an
balances.
idea of how much is in reserves in transit?
I don't off the top of my head. I don't have all the numbers memorized.
Okay, are we going to consider moving some from reserves to offset the 35%?
If that option it exists, it's certainly something directors can consider at the March board. Okay, 3 minutes to go through the
Rest of it.
We have
Right.
nothing else to do.
Yeah, well, the operators of this place do, so. Yeah, City of Nelson, so we're gonna just go through some pie charts. Again, this presentation will be available tomorrow about where the RDCK taxes go for different, residents in EF in the City of Nelson, so. And this is per $250,000 a home value. I know there's no such thing as a $250,000 home, but it makes the math a little easy. If you're in a $500,000 home, you multiply by 2, 750 to multiply by 3 million, multiply by 4, and so on. So RDCK tax bill for the City of Nelson, almost half of that is related to the S226, which is the rec facility that we spent a good portion of tonight talking about. And then almost another about 40% is refuse disposal and parks. So between the rec center, parks, and refuse disposal makes up about 85 or 90% of the regional district's tax bill for Nelson and area City of Nelson property owners.
And before we move on, I'll make the prerequisite point that's always made this year. And then we also, through taxation, pay for all the additional fees. Like the civic sector and the clearing sector, Nelson's on. Help the city. Yeah. That's also on top of that.
So somebody living in Blewett that has fire protection from the Blewett Fire Hall. Now, fire protection becomes about 30% of your tax bill. The Rex facility about 20, refuse disposal about another 15 or so. And then the rest is made split amongst the other 20 or so services.
Can you tell me how much of that organics material station over in Salmo is is it included in our refuse disposal?
Yes, because that's located in Central. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but, yeah, it pays it.
It's broken out pretty good.
Is it's,
The breakout, the costs are broken out pretty good.
okay.
And am I correct in that generally you're forecasting that organics facility is going to make about $100,000 and the expenses are $2 million? That's what I thought. Does that sound reasonable?
The organics program, which is allocation service 120, yeah, is got expenses coming out at 1 million.
There's two categories, but yes, okay, that's central, yeah. Although if you add in the total expenses of running that, even though we're only paying a portion, I'm looking at that service, no matter who's paying into it, is got an income of 100,000 with expenses of 2 million. Okay.
Oh, sorry, expenses of $1 million, including capital this year. This expenses go down to 671 next year.
You're looking at both?
I'm just looking at 120.
No, but I'm talking about the total cost of that service, not just what we're paying.
No, I'm looking at total cost of A120, which is Central and West Organics. It's one organics program. It's service A120.
What's 119?
119 is east, that's Preston.
Is it the same facility?
No, it isn't.
Is it different? Facility?
Yeah, Preston has its own organics facility.
And it's only making 100,000 a year,
71.
71.
And its expenses 600.
Its expenses is 1.1 million for 2025.
So is there an expectation that it will just make money someday? Or?
Yeah, I mean, it's a longer conversation. What those facilities do is they allow instead of piling up organics, there's a high cost of piling up organics in landfills. Not only from a cost perspective, but from a leachate perspective, from an environmental damage perspective. So it basically removing those from landfills has a positive net impact on both the life of that landfill and the cost of managing that landfill. And we're looking forward 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So we don't have enough time today for me to go through, and I frankly, I couldn't, but completely.
You're saving money in the landfill.
You're saving money in the landfill, basically.
And the costs drop off from the million quite drastically in 5 years because the facility's built now.
Eventually you'll be able to sell it. So
At some point there'll be some
it's meeting a regulatory requirement.
Yeah.
In the 2030s, we're required to divert organics. So we're just getting set up to meet the requirement.
Okay, Nelson Blue Fire, this is Nelson contract, so similar to the last one, fire just over 30%, wreck and refuse disposal making up about 75%. Somebody in Balfour, fire again 40, refuse another good chunk. And here now you see wreck is not part of the Balfour tax bill, which we've been talking about. And so they pay into a bunch of other services. And then Beasley, somebody in Beasley Fire Protection area, about a quarter again for fire, 20% for rec, and about 15% for refuse disposal.
Do you know what the percentage of the recycling portion is in our waste management costs?
I don't. Recycling has a bit of a higher higher income. But no, I don't know off the top of my head.
All we can say is it's improved over last year.
Yeah.
Because the subsidy was finally increased by the province. It's tricky to find the numbers right now, but it was a significant increase.
Yeah.
And when I went down to the recycling, I said, well, I heard someone goes to file and get burnt. And the employee gave me a whole breakdown of where it's going, how it's being recycled. So it's all local, it's all being recycled, plastic, everything. Recycled. And my understanding is that glass is not recycled, it's used for barriers and landfills, or instead of saving money that way for methane release.
Again, I'm not an expert on that, but I do, yeah. I have heard that, but I can't confirm that. Yeah. Yeah, so we have contracts with various organizations who take that material away. So we're not always able to follow where it goes or what happens to it. So a lot of it we know, and some of it may get diverted where we may not follow, right?
A great question for public time and joint research and recovery.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think it's changed a lot since.
Yeah. Okay. North Shore Fire Protection, similar to, again, the other ones with wreck, fire, and refuse disposal. And that brings us to the end of the presentation, right? It's almost right on time. Good job, everyone.
I've got one last question. Why are we meeting here, not in the RDCK building?
Few reasons. One is capacity. The RDCK boardroom is not set up for large public meetings. We didn't want to run into a situation where we have 100 people show up and we have to turn 50 people
We'll
away.
try for 100 next time.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Sure.
We've got 300 employees at the regional district for 75,000 people. Can you tell me how much the East Kootenai has people working in the regional district, their population? And
Not comparable. East Kootenai, the regional district, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, doesn't run 3 major rec facilities. They have a completely different model, not completely, but a different model for waste disposal. They don't have 186 services. But I think that one of the main factors is the rec facilities. They don't operate to the same level.
How about trail?
Trail, for example, in Trail, the rec facilities in Grand Forks are operated by the district, but other than that, they're operated by the municipalities. So like that's the problem across the province, is that there's no regional district that every regional district delivers the services that have been asked for by the public over time. So the closest regional district to us is probably regional district on the Nanaimo, where they're operating more than one major recreation facility, and they have a very robust regional park system. But most have one or the other, depending upon. Every regional district has different services.
Well, I think you guys are pushing services on us. And I think what we really need is an independent full review of the regional district to be made public.
Yeah.
Because I find our services and our costs are ridiculous. And we need a core review.
So the calculations that we found were, it's about, just for administration stuff, almost like $180 per resident, where the Cowichan Valley is about 57. So there are some,
What rec facilities does Cowichan Valley have that the regional district provides?
this is just under the general government.
Yeah, again, I think to Joe's point, you can't do a direct comparison when you have such a varied level of service provided.
But are
Betty's
rec
point
center
is why.
administration stuff in its own category? It's not in general administration for us, is it?
No.
No. So these are your general administration.
Right, so the general admin, a larger overall level of services also requires a larger general admin component.
I think to Benny's point though, that if on the very first slide that there was $50,000 set aside for an organizational view, and part of that is looking at how we use staff and how we how we can find new ways to be
I
more
think
effective.
it would probably be more conducive to having an outside review.
It is an outside review.
Independent.
Yeah.
That
I
you're
know that I
paying for.
come from an area, a neighborhood
I think-
where I have a really tight community and we get together quite often and it's an ongoing discussion about how regional district feels like they've empowered them to a place beyond. It's just providing simple services. And there's a lot of frustration out there.
Which, because the public, we have not asked for, so how did we get to this place where we are an RDCK that is taken on so much more than other RDCKs? And we look back and how did we get here? Because now we don't necessarily want to be on board your.
Sorry, so
So Watson actually has brought this up in a few meetings. She's the chair, which is equivalent to the mayor of the city council. And she has said quite a few times over the last year, we are getting beyond our core services. And it's becoming harder and harder to manage, and we're not taking care of the projects that we should be taking care of. But what I am noticing is that even though this is identified, nobody is actually bringing forward resolutions of removing services or actively, intentionally making that a part of the process. So how do you activate the will of directors to participate? I know Cheryl has many times suggested about reducing taxation, and I watch her get outvoted all the time. So it's like you have one person who's like around this table of 20 who's identifying ways that we can reduce costs, but you're not having the will of the other directors engaged to support that. So how do you do that? I don't know. It's like we have to put pressure on the individual directors, I guess, because we have no mechanism to push this forward.
We need to change direction.
And we have finite resources to pay these taxes, unlike a regional district, which operates on a completely different system.
So what I'm hearing is that some of the feedback we're taking, that staff are just doing what we tell them to do. So they're this part of the conversation. We tell them to fix the pool or rebuild it when the roof falls or do major ceiling or $7 million renovation on the pool so that we can have a pool. We decided that at Rec 5. So they did, and then they did it and went and found the money and got our $4 million grants and what have you. So what I'm hearing is that there's a, I don't want to understate the word, like I was saying, concern, but that seems a little, not that there's the fact that your property tax bill is increasing is causing you concern.
And
It's a big concern, and again, I don't know what word, you're very concerned, like, we'll add an adverb to it, very concerned. And so, if you sat in on Friday, we all are like, oh my God. I ranted, I have to apologize to staff, even though Tom didn't have anything to do with it. I ranted about transit. It went up dramatic. I wept when the loan on the rec center went up $250,000, just like that. I lamented that I didn't raise your taxes in 2017, 18, 19, 20. I didn't raise your taxes on the rec center.
Yeah.
And, the city of Nelson wasn't too keen on raising your taxes, but I said, okay, I didn't do it. And now we've got a tax increase because we didn't put enough money in reserves, our asset management plan. And now we have $1 million bill coming up for the ice plant, which we knew was coming up. But by the way, 5 years ago when we budgeted, it was 500,000. So it's over doubled in 5 years in cost. So we were like, hey, we're doing pretty good. We got some reserves. We're not going through it. We got 500, so we should be good. Borrow 100 or 2 at 1%. We should be okay. And then it doubles. We don't have the reserves, and the interest rates triple. So that's why we are hiring an asset management person to force us, in a way, for staff, it's just to give advice. My perspective is to force us to say, we have to, whatever the word is, make sure that we tax appropriately to manage our assets, because we cannot, in my opinion, humble opinion, and you can elect me out or not, but if we do not have a swimming pool and an ice rink, our community will suffer quite a bit in the side of recruitment of doctors, engineers, whoever you want to talk about, nurses, whatever. These are assets that actually, in my opinion, in my house, I'm going to get taxed. Like, make no mistake about
As
it.
a
I'm getting
healthcare
taxed.
professional,
Every study shows that, in fact, Goderich had had a heck of a time. They couldn't get doctors, whatever. They invested massively in their public infrastructure to try and recruit professionals to their community, and through that process, they were successful. So I understand people saying, cut back and don't do. But when you analyze it, the three things that you're paying for in Blewett are community complex, the garbage, and the fire. That is taking up 70% of your RDCK bill. We cannot cut back on any of those. Ramona Faust and I deliberately 7-8 years ago said, we're underpaying our volunteer firemen. We are going to raise your tax bill in Blewett, Beasley, North Shore, and Balfour, because we are paying our volunteer fire people $17 an hour to go out every Tuesday and work for 4 hours to train. And we're going to pay them to be on call. We are not allowing everyone to take a free ride on these volunteers' backs. You look at your fire budget, go back to 2017 or 16, and you'll see it's increased. And part of the increase is, for sure, my decision to say, I'm not taking a free ride on those volunteers. I'm paying them to show up and look after my house, of which I make $1,000 a year because I can get fire insurance on my house. So I understand what you're saying, and I understand that the taxes have increased, especially the last 3 years. They were pretty flat during the 2000s. They have increased quite a bit in the last few years, and I'm very sensitive to that and really trying to find ways to deal with it. But at the end of the day, those are the struggles that we deal with at our table. Those are the big decisions that we make. And what I'm taking back from this meeting is that people are very concerned about the rate of property tax increase. I haven't mentioned downloads and how the provincial government is also allowing you as property tax owners to pay a little more of the total tax bill, but that's also happening in many jurisdictions. So there's a lot of factors, but I want you to know that we directors, the 20 of us, were sitting at the table for 6, 7, 8, 9 hours, and staff for hundreds of hours, cutting and binding and trying to manage it. So it's not flippant. You may not agree with me, but it's not flippant. It is.
I'm talking about waste, not about.
There's very
no waste, eh?
Very little waste.
Why?
Show me waste. Fire department, show me the waste.
I understand.
Show me the waste. Sorry, you're going. I'm debating, and I said I would.
I understand over in the Castlegar area, there's asbestos pipe in the ground, and you guys are gonna change it into, for water.
One of the biggest
Hold it.
liabilities is asbestos concrete pipe.
And then you're gonna put regular pipe for water, which is fine, but I understand you said the best thing to do is to take the asbestos pipe out of there instead of leaving it in the ground.
No, this is the problem. And I will address this because at our water services committee meeting, maybe earlier in 2024, anyway, we found out about our legacy of 50 miles of concrete asbestos pipe built in the 70s, 60s, 50s as a very effective thing. And you're right. The problem becomes if it becomes friable. Once it starts degenerating, you have a brutal mess on your hands. So it's not a simple little, well, let's just leave it in the ground and put pipe inside of it, which is a good idea if you can. Or beside it or dig up. But boy, the legacy you have there is massive. And we have so much of it in the ground that we don't even have a place to put it. If we were to dig it up, there's nowhere to put it. So you're addressing a big problem, but it's not a waste.
I'll bring you up another example.
Okay, I'm sorry, folks, like,
Well, I'm talking
but
about
we've got a
waste.
public
I'm
meeting,
talking
so
about
go
waste.
ahead.
You got the Beasley Fire Department. You take all the siding off it and put hardy plank on it. You put a well in there and they can get the water from somebody else. Seems like you guys have money and we've got to get rid of that bloody money.
So I can speak
gotta
just
spend it.
a bit to the Beasley Fire Department. The Hardy Plank was funded by grants because you do not want your fire station burning down.
So we use gas tax money.
Taxpayers too, like that's such a.
But it's money that comes to the regional districts and municipalities for the purpose of infrastructure upgrades. And that's showing, like I spent 500,000 on the Beasley Fire Department, give or take, on those kind of upgrades from gas tax money from the federal government to ensure that we can keep that asset in good shape. Now we've got it in good shape, we're gonna save money every year to ensure that we can replace the roof in 25 years, the siding and what have you. So we're embarking on that asset management process. That did not cost your property tax anything to do those major upgrades at Beasley and out at Blewett. And I think in Balfour as well. So anyway, I'm just offering you that I'm actually hearing you, we really, really focus on making sure we're not wasting. And you have every right, and I actually respect and want you to be critique of our practices so that we can fine tune them even more.
I have a couple of suggestions. They're small amounts, but
Pardon me?
The lady behind you.
the community sustainability, can we get out of that? Because I think 4 areas have already pulled out of there. That's CSLAC, isn't it? S105?
Yep.
Yeah. So 4 areas have already pulled out of that because they haven't identified any reason that's beneficial to us. So I'd like to suggest we pull out of that. And as well, the other thing is, why don't we trim discretionary allowances for directors? And then all of the conferences happen on a rotation system. So 1 year, half of the directors go, and the next year, the other half go.
Thank you. We will. And you
So you
can,
get the same kind of representation at these things, it's just that you have fewer people attending and they can all share the information. I got it. Thank you.
yeah, no, Cheryl's picking up.
What I wanted to ask is like, you mentioned about the fact that, you want to hire people, there are job openings.
Yeah, so when we do have people that leave for another job somewhere else. So then we have an opening and we have to fill. So then we go through a recruitment process. Yeah, so we don't, in any company or organization, you always have people leaving and you have people coming. So we're net overall, we're reducing by 1 position. We're adding 1 asset management position and we're reducing 2 building inspection positions.
Okay, my point was the fact that you mentioned in one of the slides, or the map, administration.
Yeah.
Expensive or whatever, that it's hard to recruit or maintain because of the cost of living here. So yes, to me, it is kind of shocking that it's like after the property taxes here in the rural is higher than what we have in Norman.
It's actually the cost of housing, not the property tax. It's
The property with less than half, it's less than half. Yeah, than what is in
But your
the cost, it's like the cost of the property.
Your HR person though said last week, they have a big pool to choose from. So that's what HR said, and yet we're hearing that there's a shortage of,
Well, I think
no, there isn't a shortage. It's a challenge when you're recruiting people to this area, look at the cost of homes. And they don't say it's property tax. They say,
Because they don't see that.
no, they come, no, they're coming to Nelson. They're expecting rural interior BC. I should be able to get a house for $500,000. Guess what? You don't. You don't, it's gonna cost you 900, $1 million or more dollars to buy a house. Don't even look at the property tax.
No, but what I'm saying is the fact that the houses, the price of the house in lower mainland are double or triple than this. Yet the property tax are lower. This is what I.
That's due to high density.
know.
Yeah.
Because I pay there and
Yeah.
No,
That's due
we
to
understand.
density.
I
Yeah.
think one of the messages that the three politicians, staff just,
Yeah.
who would we tell them to? I've
Yeah.
heard that there's concern about the rising property taxes.
And
So we've got that.
In the lower mainland, I can go swimming for $5 at their rec there and it's 8 here.
The density.
Well, Joe,
Density.
we could get into that side of it because the board approved our policy on fees and admissions. And we decided to have a
No, it's
we
really.
decided to take a look at what the cost to operate is, and then work, as Joe had said, the price in relationship to the public subsidy. So this is the dilemma we face, and I thank you for raising that. So I would, in fact, Joe knows anyway, I was fighting the policy and I'd like it to be $5 and raise your tax another $40 on your house, because it'd be fairer if more people could get access to it. We wouldn't be eliminating people because of cost. But it's one or the other. Either you pay on your house or we pay at the turnstile. And those are the kind of decisions. And so I ended up, Joe was right, that we have a system where it says it costs this many dollars an hour to run it. And we're subsidizing people, this person, this child, we're subsidizing 100%. And the 10-year-old, we're subsidizing 75%. And the 75-year-old, we're subsidizing 100%. And some adult, we're only subsidizing 50%.
But the goal in recreation is to drive through efficiencies and good programming, higher utilization. And you see that reflected in the seniors utilization. The more we can have share programming staff across the facilities and develop strong programming that works not just in Preston, but also in Castlegar, and share what we're doing with ice allocation with staff in Preston, the more we can keep that facility full and people going through it, reduces that pressure on taxation, because you're seeing higher user fees and more use of the facility. Because fundamentally, the baseline necessary to run the service is going to be a certain amount, and in a rural area, we don't have the same kind of density to get that critical level of service. And it's interesting with recreation specifically, because if you go back 10 years, we are charging $3.5 million today, and we were charging $3.5 million before. And as interest rates dropped, directors at the time used that to soften taxation because there were growths in other areas. And then over time, that has increased back up to the same level. We're charging the same tax today as 10 years ago. The consequence has been is we didn't build the same kind of reserves in that service to deal with all the maintenance and asset renewal that needs to happen. And because we didn't put those into reserves, we also didn't earn the interest on top of those reserves. So we've lost out as a whole what that service could be doing to reduce future taxation. But those were choices that were made.
I just want to speak to that. I just want to speak to reserves. I just want to speak to, I think.
This is just FYI, Brian, the final comment. We've heard the message of the taxation level.
Let me start by
Thank
saying
you.
I appreciate all you guys up there.
So go ahead, Brian,
I
please.
really do. You guys, your heads are full of this stuff. I love it. Okay. I really, really appreciate everyone up there. I really do. I'm just thinking, I think we're 50 million something reserves, like for total everything, and somewhere in. And I'm just thinking, like I talked to Tom, and he says, well, this reserve is for this, and this reserve is for this, and this is coming from the provincial government. We have this law, blah 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 blah. And I'm just saying, I'm thinking out of the box here, because this is the reserve for that thing, and we are dependent on that if we don't, like, from the provincial government. Like this is we're saying that has to be allotted to that reserve. We'll have $50 million I'm thinking, well, the interest rate on it, this is your assessment person can be doing this. Your assessment person is saying, well, $50 million, that's generating a lot of money. And is that, where is that going?
Back into reserves.
Back into the reserves. So they would say, we don't have enough money. So like you guys know, well, we don't have enough reserves. Like we saved up and the interest rates have gone up. We don't have enough reserves for this area. Can we balance it out that we have reserves that we can transfer from one to another? Well, the provincial government don't allow it. Well, let's talk to the provincial government.
Yeah.
Let's talk to them. It's just no way. Well, let's talk to them. Well, we won't.
No, and it sounds, it's not even just a discussion with the provincial government. I doubt you can get the whole board to agree, we're just gonna throw all our money together.
I didn't say that. I just said,
Yeah,
and every reserve,
yeah,
like you have $50 million, and I'm sure the majority of the reserve would be going to the rec center or whatever.
mhm,
But I'm just saying that reserve needs to be generating capital.
It
And
does.
that capital needs to be adjusted, for each.
it does, and it goes back into the reserves.
It goes back into the specific reserve because it's keeping it contained. So when a group of taxpayers in their service through their asset management planning have decided to build X reserve, as it earns interest,
But I'm saying it's the largest reserve ever.
it just goes, they all make interest in their spots. They cumulatively make the same amount of interest as if they're in one pot versus whether they're in 50 pots.
Yeah.
But they go back to that reserve because that keeps the fairness intact. So that the people who built the reserve for service for a purpose earn the income and the benefit from the interest on that reserve in that service.
For those people.
For that
I'm
service.
just saying, I'm just trying to think out of the box.
We're gonna have to leave it.
I'm not finished yet. Just one second.
Well, okay, we answered one thing, you can't do it. The second thing, and we are getting interest.
Yeah.
The third
I'm
one.
just thinking out of the box here. And we're looking at, as we all know, we're looking at a bubble. We're looking at a bubble in housing prices, et cetera, et cetera. And this bubble is created by a country that is the largest drug exporter and importer and the money laundering country in the world is Canada. And yes, Sam Cooper, a journalist of 20 years, has exposed this. We've got to research this stuff. And this is exposure. We're the largest money laundering company.
Calling time, sorry. We're on RDCK budget. I'm calling that out of order, Brian.
I'm just saying, look outside the box.